Hey folks, I'm Mike. This is KEI Fabrication. 2.5 years ago, we pulled what was left of this vintage open wheel NASCAR modified out of the woods, and we've begun the resurrection process. Here we are 45 years later, and this car is extremely close to returning to the track. I hope you like this stuff. Follow along, like, share, and subscribe, and go on the journey with us. Got your earplugs in. I must have tacked it somewhere else and forgot, because she's still hanging on. Yep, I figured a tack in one spot was probably not the safest thing to be doing. Well, sure enough, I tacked it in two places. Obviously, we got to come up with a different plan. We'll be back again in a minute. Finally. Okay, why did I just cut the rear end out of it? Well, first of all, it was just tacked in place by 3-inch tall blocks, and I really tack welded them in. As you saw, I had to cut through both sides, and it just happened to be 1/4-inch weld tubing that I used because that's what was laying around. Alright, why did I take it out? Well, first of all, I have to get rid of those spacers. Second of all this bracketry is about 1/4 welded in terms of being permanent. So rather than try to weld it under the car, I brought it out so I could do that. The second thing I need to do is I'm going to install all the wheel cylinders, shoes, pack the wheel bearings, put the axles in for the last time, seal up the quick change gear cover, and basically fill it with fluid. So when this goes back in, hooking the brake lines up, putting the bolts in the suspension, and this thing is going to be ready to bleed the brakes and basically go out for a test drive. So the other reason is, by having the rear end out of the car, pardon the wild ride, by having the rear end out of the car, I have to build that rear firewall sheet metal that goes from the top of the window down to the back of the cage, and to get in and out of there and be able to stand up inside that area is going to make my life a lot easier. So now I have the freedom of that space to get that done. So that's the why and a little bit of the how, and now it's the do, right? All right, let's get busy. Guess I knocked you out of focus. Sorry about that. Alright, so I welded the shock brackets to the 4-link brackets, and I welded the 4-link brackets all the way around the axle tube. For the time that you were in focus, before I knocked you out of the way, you saw me stepping all over, and what I was trying to do is minimize the shrinkage in any particular direction so I didn't alter the alignment of the axle tubes. I'm quite certain I altered them some. Again, I use the word minimize. I'm trying to minimize the amount that the axle bearings moved relationship to the carrier bearings, for the obvious reason of accelerated wear and that sort of thing, scrubbing horsepower because you're binding up the bearings, but more importantly, maybe it's not more important, equally as important is changing the alignment of one tire in relationship to the other. So anytime you weld concentrated, high heat, good penetration, when it's cooling, during the welding process it expands. When it's cooling, it shrinks and stays there. So that's why they use stress relieving to get rid of that shrinkage, or at least relax it. And or you use the technique of moving around to minimize the effect of the shrinkage. Every weld shrinks, especially if it's not heat treated afterwards. This particular situation, every weld is going to shrink. I'm just trying to make it shrink so they cancel each other out. Hopefully that makes sense. Alright, what I've done is I've fabricated these little straps. They're going to go, it's hot so I can't touch it, but these straps are going to go on the back side of the 4-link brackets. There's a lot of distance between the axle tube and where the load comes through the bracket, and any additional force is just going to cause them to bend. So if you tie one side to the other, now you're sharing the strength of one or the other, and even the bolt and the heim joint in the location shares the strength of one bracket with the other. I've got my shrinkage protection devices in here, or prevention devices. These are aluminum slugs machined to the exact length, plus a few thousandths of the heim joint and the spacers that capture it between the brackets. So when I weld this on, I'm not creating a wrestling match for myself or anyone else that is going to disassemble or make an adjustment in the rear end. You should be able to loosen the bolts, the brackets will relax, and it should easily slide in the adjustment range. So these are going to add some additional strength, and I'll weld those up. I'm going to take a little break. I think super hot day, super high humidity. Trying to get this done in the morning, but it's not making any difference. I'm soaking wet already, and it's barely 9 o'clock in the morning. I forgot I didn't have the spacers in the bracket over there, so I don't want to trap them in the wrong location. So I'll go ahead and final weld these. Then I can take the spacers out of this side, put them in the other side. Well, I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, that's all of the 4-link brackets for the rear end. I've got one more bracket to weld, which is the panhard rod bracket. That needs to go on the front side of the axle. I'll flip it, but right now I'm actually going to seal up the cover here, so when I put it back in the car it's ready to put fluid in. Just needs some RTV and quick cleanup with some brake parts cleaner. Put it back on. I've got all new bolts and washers to go in there. So this has a gasket on it that's in pretty good shape, but just as a little insurance policy, I'm going to put a very light coating of this ultra black on, just to make sure I'm getting compression. I know it only had a couple of bolts in it, but it was dripping out of the bottom of the cover a little bit. So just a very light coating, and hopefully that'll get rid of the potential for just a nuisance kind of a mess in the heat of the moment when we're trying to get this car out on the track, even if it's just for parade laps. Alright, we're going to let that cool before I weld the final wrap around the axle, just to prevent the shrinkage and change in the alignment of the rear end. Well, back under there. Alright folks, that's going to be it for this one. If you're still with me, obviously you like this sort of thing. Thank you so much for following along with the rebuilding and restoration of the old number 7, otherwise known as the B&J Special. Thanks again. Hit that like button for me, would you please?